And welcome back, everybody. This is Rusty here with the Rugby Review, and this week we're going to be going through round 14 in the URC. And just so everybody is caught up, we've only got 5 rounds left of the regular season of the URC before we get into the playoff push here. So here is the game schedule for round 14. On March 27th, there were 3 games played. The first game was Sharks versus Cardiff, followed by Glasgow versus Benetton, and then the third and final game on the 27th was Leinster versus Scarlets. The following day, March 28th, kicked off with Bulls versus Munster, followed by Connacht versus Ospreys, and then the Lions versus the Dragons. And the second to last game of March 28th was Stormers versus Edinburgh, and round 14 was capped off with a game between Zebre versus Ulster. So here we have all of the final results. We're just going to zoom in on the left half of the screen here for now. And what we're first going to look at is game 1 of March 27th, which is Sharks versus Cardiff, where the Sharks won by a score of 21-15. So now let's look at the stat line here a little bit. And this was a very physical back and forth game between both of these teams. Sharks did have the possession advantage, which forced Cardiff to have to put in a very big shift defensively. You can really tell the defensive effort Cardiff put in. They had 183 attempted tackles during the course of this game to just 91 for the Sharks, so just a huge difference there. And Sharks went into halftime with a lead in this game, and fortunately for the Sharks, they were able to hold and maintain that lead throughout the second half. And it was also a good thing for the Sharks that they had a very dominant forwards performance that were better in the scrums, better in the mauls, which I think really helped Sharks during the course of this game. Otherwise, I think Cardiff would have probably come back in and maybe even won this game. One thing I do want to point out is down at the bottom, turnovers won, turnovers lost. Cardiff's defensive effort was very strong this game, having gotten 10 turnovers at ruck time. Handling discipline could have been a little bit better by the Sharks, having gotten 7 turnovers lost during the course of the game to just 1 for Cardiff, but didn't seem to bite the Sharks in the butt this week in particular. So this is, a good, strong win by the Sharks, definitely giving them more positive momentum, climbing up the ladder towards the top 8. And then Cardiff will definitely look to right the ship and start getting victories back underneath their belt, coming down to the last few weeks and few rounds of the URC competition. So our second game that we're going to be looking at, Glasgow versus Benetton. This is a game where Glasgow won by a score of 31-10. Now what we won't see is kind of the first and second half difference here. This was one of many games this particular week that was very close in the first half, and then one team, Glasgow in this situation, just came out, blew the doors off the opposite team, established a very healthy lead, and maintained that healthy lead to secure the victory. So again, very close game at half. You can kind of see that with some of the numbers here on how even this competition was for at least one half. Possession, territory, slight edge towards Glasgow, but not too much of a difference there. Both teams had to play a very physical game of rugby, both attempting over 200 tackles during the course of this game. Despite having to attempt a lot of tackles, both teams were able to play running rugby this week as well. Glasgow had 466 meters gained to 493 for Benetton. Again, despite the huge physical effort both teams had to put in, they both were able to play a running game this past round. What I do want to zoom in on, and what I think kind of helped Glasgow and hurt Benetton, is down at the bottom here. So the stat that helped Glasgow is Glasgow had 11 turnovers won at the ruck time. Really strong defensive effort for Glasgow, able to stop offensive momentum for Benetton. In addition, the one stat that hurt Benetton was turnovers lost. 15 turnovers lost just during the course of the game, 15 handling errors to just 1 turnover lost for Glasgow. So not only is Glasgow doing a great job at turning Benetton over defensively, but Benetton is also hurting themselves by having a lot of turnovers and giving the ball back to Glasgow. And with the way Glasgow's been playing, they don't need a second invite to take advantage of all these handling errors. So good win by Glasgow, helps them maintain top spot on the ladder, and then Benetton obviously is probably still trying to be in the hunt for the top 8, so these last 5 rounds will be crucial for Benetton, especially for them to get back into the winning category. Now, our third and final game for March 27th was Leinster versus Scarlets, where Leinster won by a score of 36-19. Now, let's look at the stat sheet here as well. And this is another game where the first half was super competitive between the two teams, and then the second half happened, and Leinster came out and just blitzed the Scarlets really quick at the beginning of the second half, was able to stretch and establish a lead, and just held on to that lead till the end of the game. Now, I will say, the first half was, the first 20 minutes of the first half, Leinster had terrible discipline, got 2 yellow cards, and allowed Scarlets to get a lot of momentum in the first half. And then in the second 20 minutes of the first half, Scarlets had the terrible discipline, got a yellow card, and then that allowed Leinster to get back into the game. And then it was a very close competitive game at halftime. And again, Leinster came out, blitzed the Scarlets. In addition, Leinster had a very strong defensive effort during the course of the game, especially in the second half, to keep the Scarlets from scoring and getting back into the game. And you can really see that by the number of tackles made by Leinster, or number of tackles attempted, I should say. 230 tackles attempted for Leinster this past week. Just a huge, huge defensive effort for them. So again, very good, very strong win for Leinster. Helps Leinster stay in the top half of the top 8. And then I don't know if Scarlets mathematically can actually get back into the top 8, but they will want to have some form of positive momentum as they go into the last weeks of the season, going into the offseason especially. So our fourth game and first game of March 28th was a super close game between the Bulls and Munster, where we have the Bulls edging out Munster by a score of 34-31. And so let's look at the stat sheet here. So there's really not much here between either of these teams. It's a very close competition, very hard-fought game by both of these teams. Now, if you look a little bit more closely at this stat sheet here, it would honestly look like Munster was the better team. They had more possession, much more territory. They forced the Bulls to be under a lot of defensive pressure. However, Bulls were a very well-playing team. They were able to take advantage of what little possession and little territory they had, and they were able to secure the victory here. So both teams do come away with points here. So we have the Bulls having a winning bonus point victory, and then Munster gets to walk away with a losing bonus point. So that'll be, maybe actually Munster gets to walk away with 2 losing bonus points because they lost by 7 points or less, and they also scored 4 more tries. So good win for the Bulls here. Definitely one that they want to win, given how close these teams are in the live ladder. And then obviously not the result that Munster would want, but to walk away with 2 points in a losing effort, not going to be the worst thing as we come down to the last 5 weeks of the competition here. So our 5th game of this week was a very close game between Connacht and Ospreys, where Connacht just got the edge and secured a victory by a score of 21-14. And so let's take a look at the stat sheet here. So this was a very physical, very back and forth game. You can see the physicality between the two teams because Connacht had to make 193 tackles. Ospreys had to make 204 tackles, 193 tackle attempts for Connacht, 204 tackle attempts for Ospreys. So again, very physical game between the two teams. In addition, this was a very back and forth game where Connacht would score, Ospreys would answer. Connacht score again, Ospreys would answer. Now, the unfortunate thing about this game is this game was probably decided by a yellow card. So unfortunately for the Ospreys, at about the 70th minute mark, one of their players was shown a yellow card, and the Ospreys were down a player for the last 10 minutes of the game, and Connacht obviously was able to take advantage of the numbers advantage that they had and secure another home victory. So, obviously Connacht will be super happy about this. I think this is the 5th game in a row that they've won. So Connacht has a lot of strong momentum heading into the final weeks of the competition this year. And Ospreys just on the fringe of top 8. So these last 5 rounds will be crucial for the Ospreys, and they will look to bounce back and get back into the winning category in the following round. Game 6 of this week was a strong performance by the Lions. So the Lions took on the Dragons, and the Lions won by a score of 42-16. Lions won by a score of 42-26, not 16. And so we have the stat sheet here, and this is the 5th or 6th game in a row that the Lions have won. So Lions and Connacht are in a really good spot, having a lot of good momentum heading into the final rounds of this year. Tough loss for the Dragons, but they do walk away with a scoring bonus point. Obviously not what they're looking for, but you're not going to be too upset gaining as many points as you can heading into the last rounds of the competition. So again, super strong performance by the Lions here. They had a bit of an edge in possession plus territory, forcing the Dragons to have a higher number of tackle attempts. Now what I want to zoom in on is the bottom half of the stat sheet here, because I think it will showcase the strong game that the Lions had and an area that kind of hurt the Dragons during the course of this game. So again, strong offensive game by the Lions. The Lions had 513 meters gained during the course of this game, and also had 21 clean breaks or 21 line breaks. So that's a lot of meters gained, and that's a lot of times where the defensive line of the Dragons has been breached, and the Dragons are having to play defense in retreat mode. So it's just a lot of effort for the Dragons to constantly have to fall back, play defense going in reverse. It's just a lot of effort. In addition, I think the Dragons hurt themselves with a little bit of ill discipline from a handling standpoint. Dragons had 11 turnovers lost to just 3 for the Lions. So, really strong win for the Lions again. They get to keep a lot of positive momentum rolling into the final rounds of the competition. And again, Dragons will just look to see what type of positive momentum they can carry into the offseason at the end of this season. Our 7th game was another one of those games where it was even first half, but a better second half by one team over the other. And so we have the Stormers versus Edinburgh, where the Stormers won by a score of 33-14. And now let's take a peek at the stat sheet here as well. And again, very, very close game throughout the first half. I don't think Stormers did themselves any favors by having a lot of handling errors during the course of this game. But again, very close through the first half. And even through the first 20 minutes of the second half. And then once the bench players came on for Stormers, they added a very large surge of energy to the Stormers team, which then allowed the Stormers to get a few tries at the end of the game, extend the lead, and secure a very comfortable bonus point victory. And again, the only thing that really stood out to me during the course of this, or looking at the stat sheet here, is just the sheer number of handling errors that the Stormers had. Stormers had 18 turnovers lost to just 6 for Edinburgh. So just a huge difference there. Kind of surprised it didn't bite Stormers in the butt. However, Stormers walked away, again, with a comfortable bonus point victory, and Stormers have had a turnaround and are now back to winning ways after having, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks in a row of losses, but then Stormers again have turned themselves around. 2 or 3 games in a row they've won, lots of good momentum, and then Edinburgh, like every other team this week, we'll just look to get back into the winner's circle and regain some positive momentum here. And so this brings us to our last game of the week here, and our last game of the week was between Zebre and Ulster, where Ulster won by a score of 28-12. And again, very similar to many other games where super close, super competitive in the first half, and then Ulster was able to take advantage of the red card that Zebre Parma got in the first half. So again, it's close throughout the first half. Parma got a red card about 30-ish minutes into the first half, and then Ulster had the man advantage for the last 50 minutes of the game. Ulster eventually wore down Zebre and was able to extend their lead to secure a bonus point victory for this round. So Ulster's going to be happy about the bonus point victory, especially coming into the last weeks of the season. And then Parma will look to improve on the discipline frontier a little bit and try to turn it around and see if they can get any wins going into the last rounds of the season here. So that's all of the games for round 14. Let's take a look at the live ladder now. So on the left side of the screen was the standings after round 13. On the right side of the screen are the standings after round 14. Not much movement happened this particular week. The only teams we saw climb up the ladder this particular week was the Lions and the Sharks. So both got victories this week, seeing them climb up the ladder a little bit higher. And then the only teams that fell down the ladder this week was Cardiff, Munster, and Ospreys. Everybody else stayed in the exact same spot. And then as we come down to the last few rounds here and try to get that race for the final 8, obviously Vodacom Bulls are at that final spot. But I would say, maybe all the way down to Benetton mathematically still has the capabilities of getting into the top 8. Would say once you start getting to Edinburgh, definitely Scarlets, Dragons, and Parma, the math becomes a little bit dicey there, but we'll see how the last few rounds shake out. And so here is the game schedule for round 15. So this weekend and next weekend, we're going to have Investec Champions Cup games being played. And so round 15 for the URC won't take place until the weekend of April 17th. So on Friday, April 17th, there are 3 games going to be played. First game is Edinburgh versus Zebre, followed by Dragons versus Bulls, and then Ulster versus Leinster. And then the following day, April 18th, we have Stormers versus Connacht, Lions versus Dragons, Scarlets versus Cardiff, Benetton versus Munster, and the last game of the round will be Ospreys versus Sharks. So a lot of important games to come in round 15. I hope everybody enjoys the rugby that's going to be played this week. And the next update will be revolving around the Investec Champions Cup. So again, hope everybody enjoys the games this week, and I will see you next week.